Have you noticed that every news story today has exactly two opinions? This is the greatest thing ever! Or we're all doomed. Apparently, we've lost the ability to say, hang on, could somebody please explain what this thing actually does? So today we're going to do something almost revolutionary. We're going to understand the issue before we argue about it. Every 4 years, millions of Americans rediscover the Constitution. Not because they suddenly become history buffs, but because the other party won. It's amazing. When your team is in charge, it's trust the experts. When the other team takes office, this is exactly what the founders warned us about. Apparently, the Bill of Rights is now just a seasonal decoration, like Christmas lights. You only notice them when it's time to put them back up. Lately, you've probably heard people arguing about flock cameras. You've probably seen them being cut down all around Houston. Tall little poles, tiny camera. Looks harmless, like Wally got a job with the Homeowners Association. Some folks say they're helping police catch criminals and solve crimes. Others say they're building a surveillance state, with conservative detractors saying they're tracking law-abiding citizens, and progressive detractors saying they're tracking vulnerable communities. Meanwhile, I'm over here wondering if anyone has actually explained what these cameras do. Because judging from social media, about half of the country thinks these cameras can read your thoughts, and the other half thinks they only photograph serial killers. Personally, I think that they're all talking past each other because they're each answering different questions. The real question isn't, do these cameras catch criminals? They do. The real question is, what happens after government builds a system that's capable of tracking everybody? Those are two completely different conversations. Now, if you sit in the city council meetings where these ideas are discussed, you'd realize that the sales pitch is brilliant. We don't record people. No, you just record the giant metal object registered to them, that they drive every day, to all the places that they go. Oh yes, it's very different. Imagine if I'd said, I don't track Darren Hamilton, I only track the credit card in his wallet. You'd immediately understand that that's the same thing. The camera reads your license plate. It notes the time, the location, the direction of travel. Sometimes the make, the model, the color, whether there was visible damage, which is honestly more information than my insurance company has. Now, before the comment section explodes, no, there is not some government employee staring at your Honda Civic all day. Government can't even answer the phone. No, the concern has never been someone is watching me. The concern is we're building systems capable of watching everybody, and those are completely different sentences. It's like saying, I'm not worried about the fire, I'm worried about the warehouse full of gasoline. History has this funny habit. Government gets a new power, everybody promises this is just for emergencies. And then 5 years later, it's also for paperwork. Remember when civil asset forfeiture was supposed to target drug kingpins? Now they're taking cash from people who forgot that they had cash. Remember when the Patriot Act was an emergency measure? Government looked at that sunset clause like I look at a gym membership. Yeah, we'll definitely cancel it next month. Because government has one setting: permanent. So why do police like flock cameras? Well, because sometimes simple information like that is incredibly useful. Let's say a child's been kidnapped. Police know the suspect's license plate. That car passes in front of one of these cameras, the officers can be alerted almost immediately. That's a good thing. Stolen vehicle, same idea. Wanted murder suspect, same idea. If this technology only found dangerous criminals, this would be a very short episode. I'd say, great idea, roll credits. Unfortunately, technology rarely asks for permission before it starts doing more than one job. Every administration makes the same promise. Each one says, don't worry, we'll use this power responsibly. And maybe they will. I hope they do. But here's the problem. They're never the last administration to have this power. Government isn't like Netflix. You don't cancel the subscription every 4 years. Every new president, every new governor, every new mayor, every future police chief, they will inherit the tools we build today. And politicians are remarkably consistent about one thing. Nobody ever looks at a shiny new government power and says, you know what? Let's use less of this. Now let's talk about poor Steve. Unfortunately, Steve has become the Forrest Gump of public policy because Steve keeps doing incredibly ordinary things. Every issue eventually involves Steve. Steve wakes up, drives to work, stops for coffee, goes home, maybe swings by Buc-ee's because, well, it's Buc-ee's. Then he remembers he promised his wife he'd stop at Home Depot. Again. Steve's exciting life can basically be summarized as work, coffee, mulch, repeat. Steve isn't a criminal. Steve's biggest offense is forgetting why he went into Home Depot and leaving with 3 things that weren't on the list, which, let's be honest, is pretty much how Home Depot works. Now, imagine Steve drives past 3 automatic license plate readers during that trip. What do they collect? Not Steve's face, not what's inside the car, not whether he's singing along to Journey at the top of his lungs like it's still 1983. Just his license plate, along with where it was, when it was there, and which direction it was traveling. That's it. But Steve isn't kidnapping anybody. Steve is buying mulch. Again. But the camera doesn't know that. It simply records Steve was here, then here, then here. 1 camera isn't particularly interesting. 3 cameras, still probably not. But 20 cameras over a 6-month period, now you've got something different. Not because Steve changed, but because the amount of information changed. Imagine if I asked you, where were you at 2:17 last Tuesday afternoon? Most of us wouldn't remember. Now imagine somebody else does. Not because they're stalking you, but because the computer never forgot. That's a whole different conversation. Now you might say, but police have always been able to read license plates. And that's true. Absolutely. If Officer Rodriguez sees Steve drive by, Officer Rodriguez knows Steve drove by. End of story. Tomorrow, Officer Rodriguez has probably forgotten all about Steve, unless Steve drove past driving a clown car while juggling flaming chainsaws and blasting Nickelback. Then yeah, Officer Rodriguez probably remembers Steve. I mean, Nickelback? Really? Computers don't work that way. They don't forget. They don't get distracted. They don't retire. They don't accidentally lose the notebook. They just quietly keep collecting information, day after day, year after year. That's the difference. Not that information is being collected, it's the scale at which it's being collected. Nobody would call that suspicious until you put it on a map. Now here's where I'd like you to imagine something. Let's put a pin on a map for every place that Steve drives today. Work, coffee, home, church, his mom's house, the hardware store, his doctor's office, his kid's soccer game. Nothing suspicious, just life. Now add a dot for every place that Steve's been over the last week, over the last month, the last 6 months, the last full year. Suddenly those little dots begin telling a story. Not because Steve did anything wrong, but because patterns tell stories. And patterns are exactly what computers are good at finding. Funny how an ordinary life can look so very dramatic when you add enough push pins. Now here's the part that makes me nervous. Politicians of a certain ilk love saying, if you haven't done anything wrong, you have nothing to hide. Really? Then hand me your phone. Yeah, I didn't think so. Not because I think you're a criminal, but because apparently privacy only matters when it's your privacy, not somebody else's. Think about it. You close the bathroom door, but not because you're plotting a coup. You close your curtains at night, but not because you're laundering money. Privacy is simply part of being a normal human being, and insisting on respect for someone's privacy, especially when there's no suspicion of having committed a crime, isn't an admission of guilt, any more than a lack of privacy is proof of innocence. Now, Hollywood has lied to us, all in the sacred name of entertainment, and I blame television, because every crime show has convinced us that computers work like this. Enhance. Enhance again. Enhance again. Congratulations! You've identified the reflection of a suspect inside a raindrop on someone's sunglasses filmed with a flip phone. That's not how real life works. Automatic license plate readers are actually much less exciting. They're not magic, they're simply automated note-taking. The computer is basically saying, I saw license plate ABC123 at this location at 2:17 this afternoon. That's it. No dramatic music, no hacker wearing fingerless gloves, no one yelling, I'm in, which is honestly pretty disappointing. Remember Steve? Steve works for your local government. Steve isn't corrupt, he isn't evil, Steve has never twirled a mustache, his own or anyone else's. Now, Steve owns 3 polo shirts, all embroidered. Steve genuinely wants to help his community. Unfortunately, Steve also has meetings. Steve spends every 3rd Wednesday listening to software companies give presentations with titles like Leveraging AI-Driven Municipal Intelligence Solutions for Community Safety Synergy, which translated into English means, we're selling cameras. The presentation always begins the same way. Our platform provides actionable data. Actionable data. Corporate America discovered that if you stop calling it surveillance, people actually clap. Then comes my favorite slide. Every one of these presentations has it. Blue background, hexagons, random glowing lines, a city skyline, maybe a satellite. Definitely someone wearing a headset smiling at a laptop for no apparent reason. Nobody in history has ever smiled like that at Microsoft Excel, trust me. Then the salesman says, our AI uses machine learning. Fantastic. So does Netflix. And Netflix recommends documentaries I'll never watch, so I'm not sure that that's the standard we should use for public policy. But Steve nods. The city manager nods. Everybody nods, because nobody wants to be the first person to ask, so what exactly does this thing do? 20 minutes later, the city has purchased $4 million worth of software, and Steve gets a complimentary coffee mug. Good for Steve. Now we get to my favorite question. Whenever government gets a new power, I like to ask, then what? They say, it's only license plates. Okay, then what? It's only 30 days of data. Then what? It's only one database. Then what? It's only shared with neighboring agencies. Then what? It's only searchable by AI. Then what? It's only facial recognition. Then what? It's only real-time alerts. Then what? Did you notice something? None of those individual steps sounded especially dramatic. But history rarely announces, congratulations, you've now unlocked the surveillance state. It usually sounds more like we've made a small improvement to administrative efficiency. It's always one small step at a time, and one small step rarely feels like a giant leap. But eventually you realized you've climbed an entire staircase. Meanwhile, across North Texas, there's another meeting. Different conference room, different PowerPoint, different salesman, same blue hexagons. This one isn't selling surveillance. He's selling the future. And if there's one thing we've learned about the future, it's that it always needs tax abatements. Apparently, the hottest new industry is buildings, not factories, not warehouses, just really expensive buildings full of computers. When I was a kid, if somebody said they were building a factory, I knew what they meant. They made cars or furniture or cereal. Now somebody announces a data center and everybody nods knowingly, like bobbleheads who all suddenly understand what happens inside. We don't. We just know it's important because somebody used the phrase artificial intelligence and suddenly the Chamber of Commerce starts breathing into a paper bag. Now, I love how every presentation starts the same way. This facility will create hundreds of jobs. Will it? Because every picture I've seen of a data center looks like the world's quietest Costco. It's just rows of blinking lights and enough air conditioning to refrigerate the moon. Seriously, a modern data center is basically a warehouse-sized gaming PC. It takes electricity, turns it into heat, and then spends even more electricity to get rid of the heat. That's the business model. It's a space heater with venture capital. And don't misunderstand me, I'm autistic, so technology is basically one of our food groups. I'm not anti-AI, I'm not anti-data center, I'm not even anti-computer. If I were anti-computer, my entire campaign would consist of me yelling policy proposals at passing livestock. Technology is fine. Technology is amazing. I'm old enough to remember unfolding paper maps. Now, if you're under 30, let me explain. Imagine Google Maps, except every time you wanted to turn left, you had to perform origami. No, what interests me is what happens around the technology, because that's where politics lives. Every data center announcement comes with the same promises: jobs, innovation, investment, growth, opportunity, economic development. If they could legally put synergy on a billboard, they absolutely would. But then what? Who's upgrading the electrical grid? Who's expanding the substations? Who's widening the roads? Who's dealing with the increased water demand? Who's approving the zoning changes? Who's getting the tax abatements? Who's living next door to what sounds like a Boeing 737 politely humming for the next 40 years? Because giant cooling systems aren't exactly whisper quiet. It's like living next to an air conditioner that has unresolved childhood issues. And notice something else. Nobody in these meetings says, hey, maybe let's ask the neighbors. No. Instead, we get public hearings. You know, those meetings where 3 people show up, one guy reads a prepared statement for 23 minutes, someone complains about traffic, and the city council thanks everyone for their input before voting exactly the way they had already planned to vote. That's not public engagement. It's political dinner theater. The The script never changes. Thank you for sharing your concerns. Translation, we have acknowledged that you are making mouth noises. Now here's the part that fascinates me. Surveillance cameras produce large volumes of data. That much computing power needs data centers for storage. AI also needs computing power provided by those data centers to process all of the surveillance camera data. The data centers need electricity. Electricity needs infrastructure. Infrastructure needs government approval, and government approval comes with subsidies. And somehow, every step of this chain is described as the free market. That's not the free market. That's the market's group project. Everybody involved gets extra credit, except for the taxpayers who just don't remember signing up for this class. Now, here's where people assume I'm about to make a libertarian speech. Relax. I'm not going to make a speech. That would be weird. I'm just going to make everybody equally uncomfortable, because this isn't really about cameras or data centers or AI. Next year it'll be drones. The year after that it'll be predictive policing. Then autonomous traffic enforcement. Then AI-assisted permit reviews. Then smart squirrels. Ah, you laugh, but I don't know. Government has never met a buzzword it couldn't put on a grant application. Technology changes, the questions don't. That's why I keep coming back to what I've started calling the universal government test. The simple version is this: whenever government wants a new power, I don't ask whether I trust the people currently in office, because eventually they won't be. Instead, I ask, would I happily give this power to the politician that I trust the least? Not my favorite, the other one, the one who makes me yell at the television, the one whose yard signs make my eye twitch. That's how government elections work. Government powers don't disappear, they simply change hands. If my answer suddenly changes depending on who's in office, then the problem isn't the politician, it's the power we're entrusting to whoever sits in the chair. Now, the longer version is this. Whenever somebody wants government to have a new power, whether it's Austin, Washington, or your city council, I ask 4 questions. Number 1, does it actually solve the problem? Not, does it look impressive? Not, does it generate impressive press releases? Not, can somebody say leveraging emerging technologies with a straight face? Does it actually solve the problem? Because if we're spending millions of dollars, I'd like to improve something besides the consultant's vacation plans. Number 2, is it constitutional? You'd think this one would be very easy, but it isn't, because every generation discovers a magical sentence. This time is different. It never is. The Constitution has survived horses, telegraphs, telephones, radio, television, the internet, social media, and whatever TikTok is doing to attention spans these days. Somehow I think it'll survive artificial intelligence too. Number 3, is there a less intrusive way to accomplish the same thing? This one drives people crazy because Americans have become convinced that the most technologically advanced solution must also be the best solution. Sometimes a better streetlight works. Sometimes hiring another patrol officer works. Sometimes repainting the lane markers works. Sometimes the answer isn't a cloud-based AI ecosystem. Sometimes it's just Greg. Greg fills potholes. Greg doesn't have a TED Talk. Greg has a shovel. Greg quietly improves more lives before lunch than half of the consultants on LinkedIn. God bless Greg. Number 4, and this is my favorite. What happens when the people you disagree with inherit this power? Because they will. Every single administration thinks they're building tools for themselves. They're not. They're building tools for the next administration, and the next one, and the one after that. Power doesn't retire when your favorite politician does. It gets handed to somebody else with an instruction manual, which means that every law, every database, every surveillance system, every emergency power, every new authority comes with a note attached that says, to whom it may concern. History is basically one generation saying, we'll be responsible, and the next generation replying, hold my beer. Now, one thing I love about politics is how consistent everyone is. I'm kidding, nobody is. Republicans will spend 20 minutes explaining why government is incompetent, and then immediately propose giving that same government facial recognition software. Apparently, bureaucracy is hopeless, right up until it gets a new app. Democrats will spend 20 minutes warning us about giant corporations accumulating too much power, and then announce a public-private partnership with one so large it has its own weather system. Everybody suddenly becomes very trusting, as long as it's their preferred institution holding the clipboard. Here's something else I've noticed. Republicans only seem to worry about surveillance when Democrats are running it. And Democrats only seem to worry about surveillance when Republicans are running it. Meanwhile, we libertarians have this terrible habit. We ruin meetings. Because while everybody else is applauding, we raise our hand and ask, quick question, where are the deletion policies? Silence. Who audits access? More silence. What happens if the next administration disagrees with you? See, I've noticed that asking for accountability has become deeply offensive. People react like you just insulted their grandmother. I'm just asking questions. How dare you? And somehow we're considered the weird ones. No, I'm not accusing anyone of being evil. I'm accounting for the possibility that someday Steve retires. Remember Steve? Still not the bad guy. Steve's trying. Steve wants safe neighborhoods, reliable utilities, better roads, a growing economy. Steve is us. Steve is every well-intentioned public servant trying to make good decisions with imperfect information. The problem isn't Steve. The problem is that every company that walks through Steve's door says exactly the same thing. This technology will solve all your problems. And nobody asks the follow-up question. Okay, then what? Now, I know what some people are thinking. Darren, if you're worried about government, why are you talking about corporations too? Well, because I'm old-fashioned. I believe concentration of power is dangerous, even when it has really nice branding. Government says, trust us. Corporations say, trust us. The consultants say, trust the process. The software company says, our AI has been trained on billions of data points. Wonderful. Has it been trained to sit through a Denton County zoning meeting? Because if not, it's missing some really important context. Here's what I actually believe. Government has legitimate tasks that it is responsible for. Protect rights, maintain infrastructure, provide transparency, be accountable. That's real work. But somewhere along the way, government developed a second job, collecting software subscriptions. Everything's a subscription now. Movies, music, Microsoft Office, apparently democracy. Every year, new platform, new dashboard, new portal, new login, new annual maintenance agreement, new consultant, new upgrade. At this point, I'm convinced city budgets should have a line item that says, stuff Steve has to remember his password for. Now, here's where I think this debate really matters. This video isn't about Flock or cameras, because next year it'll be a different company or different cameras. It'll be AI or drones or facial recognition or technology that hasn't even been invented yet. The gadgets change, the temptation doesn't. Every generation believes our technology will finally make government smarter. Maybe. But the Constitution wasn't written because government is stupid. The Constitution was written because government is powerful. Those are completely different concerns. So, am I against flock cameras? Well, not necessarily. Am I against data centers? Also, not necessarily. But those are actually the wrong questions to ask. The right question is whether we're asking enough questions before we hand over more power to anyone. Government, corporations, or the increasingly suspicious refrigerator that's been judging my late-night snack choices. Technology isn't the enemy. Power isn't even the enemy. Unexamined power is. Power that arrives wrapped in marketing brochures. Power that gets approved because nobody wants to sound anti-technology. Power that quietly becomes permanent because somebody assumes, because everybody assumes, somebody else is paying attention. I'm a Marine. I learned to trust my equipment. I also learned something even more important. Always check your equipment. Because confidence is not a maintenance schedule, and your rifle was manufactured by the lowest bidder. The same applies to government, same applies to corporations, same applies to technology. Truth isn't a substitute for oversight, and smart isn't a substitute for wisdom. The real argument is about privacy, not data gathering, because technology always changes. But the reason behind the question, the privacy of ordinary citizens, doesn't change. How much should government know about people who aren't even suspected of committing a crime? Reasonable people can disagree about where that line should be, but I hope we can all agree on this. Before we build a system, we should probably decide where it ends. Because history has repeatedly shown most systems never stop expanding on their own. Whether you're a Republican, a Democrat, a Libertarian, or just someone who's exhausted by all of us, I'd encourage you to ask one question before supporting any new government power. Not will my side use it wisely. Ask, am I comfortable when the other side inherits it? Because they will, eventually. That's not citicism, that's self-government. And that's exactly why constitutional limits matter. Not because we expect the worst from today's leaders, but because we have no idea who tomorrow's leaders will be. The future is coming. I'm all for it. I'd just like to read the terms and conditions before Steve clicks I agree. Besides, if we're going to live in a cyberpunk dystopia, the least they could do is synchronize the traffic lights. I'm Darren Hamilton, Libertarian candidate for Texas House District 57, and I don't believe politicians should decide which books you read, which opinions you hold, or which technologies quietly reshape your community without your informed consent. Freedom isn't the absence of technology, it's the presence of accountability. So keep asking the questions, especially the annoying ones. Because every time someone tells you they have a smart solution, remember, the smartest thing in the room might just be asking, then what?